Hello everyone, it is another live stream on the Milo's Reef channel. We are in hour number 7 of Markna. Our next speaker is Alex Rose. You're about to see her. Her internet is terrible, but her presentation is here. So as long as we can get her voice to cooperate somehow, that will help immensely. At some point in this very near future, I will mention all of our sponsors. Because they have not been getting, well, I've been doing one at a time, and I should be giving them all the love. Wallace is in front of me. Nope, that's not going to work. I need a folder that's in front of me that gives me knowledge. I have no knowledge. 1 second, guys. So I'm just going to go off the list because I got to say this. I want to thank all the sponsors that supported Markna. They actually helped a lot, not only financially to pay for all this gear and to pay toward the speakers and pay toward the shipping of the prizes and to help raise money for Coral Restoration Foundation. They, their names are, Fritz Aquatics is one of them. Benepets is another. Benepets is another. Reef Nutrition, who we haven't mentioned yet. We've got Slide Lock, as you know from the last hour. Two Little Fishies hasn't been mentioned yet today. Seache, you saw their commercial. Neptune System, Ecotech, Aqua Illumination, and Marco Rocks. All these companies said, this is a cool idea. We want to support it. So thank you so much for sponsoring Markna this one time between last year's Markna and next year's Markna. After Alex's presentation, we'll be having Travis on. He's the president of MASNA. We will hear something about the next Markna, so that is something to look forward to, too. Now that I'm done with my little intro thing, and I hope you guys appreciated my nice little name under me. It's the first time I used it during the show, and I picked that picture. They said, give me a good selfie. I was like, that's the best selfie ever. Let's bring on Alex. Alex Rose has, we've been friends for a super long time. I would guess at least 12 years. And she was my cupcake girl back in the day. Because she would work in Rod's Foods booth and have these cupcakes, and I would make laps to get my cupcakes, because I love them. But she also runs Blue Ring, which is a non-profit organization to save the whales, save the ocean, save the planet.
Save everything.
I'll let her explain it all. I'm also going to mention that she is working for Coral Magazine, so she is my cohort on the magazine I'm now helping run. She also works for Amazonas for the freshwater side, which will never be uttered on this channel again. She also works with Ocean Geographic. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Yes, I got it right. Okay,
yep.
Good. So there's a lot. But the thing is, the reason I wanted Alex, she does two things. She takes the most beautiful pictures of things in nature, and I love that. I really wanted lots of that on Markna because I wanted to show these pictures, these videos, whatever we could find from these fantastic photographers. And I was like, Alex, I need you, and she said yes. She also cares deeply about the planet, and if you followed her Facebook page, if she allowed it, she writes these giant paragraphs to make you feel like a horrible human being because you're ruining the planet and how we need to do better. And she really sells her point well. She's really passionate about the future of what's going on and what we can do to protect our planet. So, Alex, thank you for coming on to Markna. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. And, I don't try to make everyone feel bad when I make my long posts. It's just accidental.
Yeah. No. They're always
right.
motivational. They're inspirational. So I'm going to go ahead and put your presentation on the screen because your internet is going to make us cry.
Yeah, we don't need to see my face. That's good. So should I try just stopping my screen, my video, so that it's just the audio and it's not working so hard?
No, let's just... you could you could try to turn off your video. You could, because you're not on camera right now. We got your slide on there. You'll tell me which slide to go to. You can see what I'm sharing, correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
All right, so I think you could, and then when we're ready to bring you back on, you could reactivate the camera. Maybe we'll have a stronger signal so your audio comes through.
Does it have that option? I actually don't know if it has that option. Can I turn the camera off?
I can't.
You might have to do it.
I've never been on your side.
I don't actually see an option to do that. I can mute myself, but I can't get rid of my video. Oh, well, okay.
Well, it is a
as long
live
as you can
stream,
hear
so
me,
why
I
would we
guess
get
we're
rid of
okay.
video? We'll just do this again. So listen, as you
That's
go through these slides, you just
a
say
fair
next,
point.
next, next, and I will just do them.
I shall.
I've got the whole thing here on my
Okay,
iPad
very
next to
good.
me. I can just flip through them. And,
Well, thank goodness for that.
go for it.
All right. Well, here we go then. Thanks for having me for Markna. I love that you're doing this, and so glad that it worked out. So I'm going to probably start by just telling you a little bit about me and what I do, and then we're going to go travel some places together. So let's go to the next slide. So I spend a lot of time underwater, and consequently, my best friends are my camera and all of my gear, of which I have a lot of it when I travel, and usually winds up all laid out on my bed somewhere before it gets assembled. So yeah, spend a lot of time with my camera gear, and I have quite a few jobs that allow me to do a whole bunch of different things that all involve the underwater world, thankfully. So next, we've got a couple magazines that I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. Amazonas, even though you said you was not to be mentioned again. Amazonas magazine and Coral magazine. So I've been with Amazonas for about the last 2 years as their communications and digital media editor. And I'm just recently starting with Coral as an associate editor. So I get to work with Mark now, which is cool. Yay. So I've been doing that for a bit. Next. And as Mark mentioned, I also have a company. So this is my company that I started back in 2017, and it's called Blue Ring. Blue Ring started because I really wanted there to be a more fun and accessible and affordable way to get involved in ocean conservation, because generally when we talk about these things, the issues tend to be so large and sort of far removed that it feels like we can't do anything to help, and it makes us kind of polarized and feeling helpless, and it's not a good place to be or a good way to feel. So Blue Ring is a very simple concept. It's a $25 annual membership, and you can, quote, marry the ocean. And then every year I donate 71% of my proceeds to a different ocean conservation nonprofit. So it's a fun way to get involved in some of these ocean conservation efforts that kind of makes you feel nice, and is just a lighthearted way to make a change positively. I also have a whole sustainable product line that I've introduced. I've got metal water bottles and reusable produce bags and bamboo utensils, all that kind of stuff to help us get away from single-use plastics, because that is one of the big and I think less insanely solvable problems if we all kind of put our heads in it together. And single-use plastics are a fairly simple thing to start cutting out of our lives if we just pay attention. So that's why that is my product line. So that's Blue Ring. I have a couple more quick Blue Ring slides, but yeah, let's do the next one. Probably should have had you go next first. But yeah, there are rings, there are pendants, there are pins, all kinds of different ways that you can show your support for the ocean. And yeah, I think it's fun. Next. And this is a picture of some of our sustainable stuff. Nice reusable double-walled stainless water bottles and all that good is stuff. So yeah, kind of keep single-use plastics out of our daily lives whenever possible.
Is that bag
Next.
you buy the whole kit as one?
You can. I also just do a set of bags as well. The bags are actually made from recycled ghost fishing nets. So
Wow.
those have all come out of the sea and then been repurposed to be something useful again.
Wow,
So
that's amazing.
yeah, kind of nice. Yeah, you can make lots of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And then one of my other jobs is I work for Ocean Geographic magazine. I am their science editor, so I get to write articles and do underwater photography. We also run expeditions, which is one of the ways that I get to travel as much as I do, which I am extremely thankful for. And actually, 3 of our Ocean Geographic trips are ones that I am going to be showing photos from today, not so much talking about the trips, but just the places that I've gotten to go and the stories that go along with them. So next.
Nice.
Our big mission at Ocean Geographic is essentially to inspire a greater understanding of and appreciation for our planet's unique ecosystems while drawing attention to the impacts of climate change. So there's always this sort of underlying climate change narrative in a lot of the things that we do, because it is sort of a pervasive issue that I think is a good thing to pay attention to. And especially when you're going on expeditions, you can never forget that everything that you're doing is also burning carbon in order to get there. So if you're going to go somewhere, if you're going to travel somewhere, it's best to make the most of it. And for me, making the most of it is by taking photos and by writing about the places that I get to go, so I can sort of share the view with as many people as want to listen to me.
I love that part.
Thanks. I do too. All right, next. Here we go. So, the first place that we're going to travel to is somewhere very chilly. We're going to go to the Arctic. So, this is an image from Svalbard back in 2015. And I really like starting with this kind of image to just take a look at my lens because it really gives you this global perspective and puts you sort of a place where you can understand that even though we're tiny and we're individuals, we really do have an impact based on everything that we do, especially at the poles. So the Arctic is changing and warming faster than almost anywhere else on Earth, other than the Antarctic. So our poles are rapidly changing. They are very much barometers for what's going on the rest of the world and sort of what's to come. And I like starting with this image because it's a good way to sort of understand why the poles are changing so quickly.
Mhm.
So in the Arctic, there's this phenomenon called Arctic amplification, which just means that everything that's happening everywhere else happens more and faster there. The reason is usually because contrasts are so stark. And you can see that very easily here visually.
Yeah.
So when you look at this white sea ice around and then the dark ocean water, you can see that there's a really big difference in how much light gets absorbed.
Yeah.
Ice is very reflective, and this is something that we refer to as ice albedo. And albedo just refers to reflectivity of a substance. So ice is very reflective, which means that when solar radiation, sunlight comes in, it bounces off the ice and goes back out into space instead of being absorbed. But when you look at all of this dark ocean water around it, it does precisely the opposite. So it absorbs all of this energy, which in turn warms the water, melts the ice, leaves more space open for more energy to be absorbed, and it's kind of this vicious positive feedback loop that's very very hard to get out of. Um, and this is why the Arctic is changing so much more rapidly than other places, and why it's really critical that we pay particular attention to our sea ice widening there. The Arctic in general seems like a really stark place that probably doesn't have a lot of life, but after you go, you realize that is absolutely not the case.
Mm.
It has a lot of important roles. It's a planetary air conditioner. Essentially, the poles both are that have been regulating our climate for millions of years. And the Arctic Ocean is extremely diverse. More than 30% of the species that live there are endemic and don't live anywhere else, which is kind of surprising considering it's such a hostile place.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of unique life there. The Arctic Ocean also has a pretty complex food web that's really important for not just the animals that live on the planet, particularly when we look at polyps and krill, because these are species that feed in the Arctic and then travel all over the planet and are eaten by so many other animals. Of course, there are also indigenous peoples that still absolutely depend on a stable sea ice platform for their lifestyles to continue. So every year that things keep changing, this adds to instability for the people that live there as well, not just the ants. So it could go on and on about the importance of why we need to pay attention to what's going on in the Arctic, but suffice it to say, this is a critical spot and certainly one of these turning point locations that we need to do everything we can to protect that so that even while our planet's climate is changing, we at least do everything else possible to make sure that the Arctic is protected. So next image that is going to pop next is from underneath the ice.
Wow.
So Arctic sea ice is sort of like an upside down coral reef. If you imagine flipping a coral reef on its head, that's sort of how Arctic sea ice behaves. This is where much of the life in the Arctic lives and feeds. All these colors that you're seeing are ice algae. So there are over 1,000 species of ice algae that live in the Arctic, and all of these form the very basis of the food chain for the planktonic life that makes up the next step in the food chain. So one of the big ones, of course, is krill. Next,
Wow.
and you're going to see this nice school of krill here. So this is krill's lovely. It's a
Yeah.
very cool animal to see in person. So the one that you find up in the Arctic primarily is Euphosia pacifica. Euphosia superba is the big Southern Ocean one that we're used to seeing in most of our fish foods. But Euphosia pacifica ends up in there as well. But for the Arctic systems, this is one of the most important critters, biomass animal on the planet. So there's more krill by weight by far than people or any other single species on the planet. Krill
Wow.
is sort of the driver of many of our ocean food webs, which is a reason that it's good to pay attention to its populations too. Krill is used more and more in both animal feeds and human supplements over the last 10 years because there are far fewer regulations of fishing krill than there are when it comes to fishing actual fish. So huge amounts, and I mean like tens of thousands per times of ton removed of krill. And this not seem insane because the biomass being so large, but when you think of how many animals in the ocean depend on krill to survive, it really is important that we start to set more reasonable limits for krill fishing because there aren't many currently, and it's gotten a bit out of hand, and we very much need to reel that in and start using it for more important things and not just, feeding and supplementing our chickens. So, more important to krill. So we'll continue talking about more plants. So, there are many species of copepods that live in the Arctic, and many of them are also fed on by seabirds. This little seabird called the willow auk. Now, unfortunately, their populations have declined pretty steeply since the 1970s, and a lot of that is because their food source keeps changing. So in that little circle picture, you'll see two different copepods. The much larger one is Calanus glacialis, which is a classic Arctic species, and the one next to it is Calanus margicus, which is a more equatorial waters are warming, the ranges of these animals are changing. So other than their size, I know it may not look like they're very different, but their nutritional composition is quite varied. So the larger species, especially because it's from the Arctic, has a lot more omega-3 fatty acids. So it's a much more high-calorie animal, which is why the little auk feeds on it and very much around its breeding season. It's got about 3 weeks to fatten up enough so that they can lay an egg for the year, try to raise the chick, and then they can fledge by the end of the season. And it's a fairly short season in the Arctic because the summer is not very long, so they don't have a lot of time. Now, the Arctic copepod species are moving north because they're trying to follow the colder water. And more southern species moving much farther. So we now have birds that are feeding off of these much smaller, less nutritious copepods, which doesn't necessarily seem like a huge deal, but when you've only got 3 weeks to fatten up enough to lay your one egg per year and then hopefully raise your chick, that does make a huge difference. It means that the bird are expending a ton more energy for a lot less calories, and they have to work much harder to catch animals that are far smaller. So this is one of the reasons that the auk is in decline because its food is changing in range based on how warm the waters get and the copepods having to travel far north.
Oh, we lost her. I was afraid that might happen, but she'll probably come back. So we are just going to sit here patiently, wait for her to return. I actually need to check on my tanks. I just realized my tanks are getting pretty hot. But I'm going to bring her back in here. Here she is. She's here. I mean, you're here. What do I do? I'm clicking on you, Alex, but it's not acting like we're connected yet. What do we do here? Solo? Oh, okay.
I'm not sure.
I think we got you.
Back?
Yes, you're back. And
Okay.
you're still on your slide.
Very good. We're back. Very good. I will go to the next one so that we don't spend too much time talking about birds. But we've also got, I know, so that's a bearded seal. These guys are also considered an ice-dependent animal because they breed and molt and raise their pups on sea ice. So this is another Arctic species that without a stable sea ice platform really does not fare very well. So that's another sea ice connection. And that's not just important for the seals, but it's also important for the polar bears because they primarily feed on these guys and they're young. So next slide.
Okay.
And you'll see here a polar bear doing something that is becoming more normal for polar bears, but shouldn't be normal for polar bears. So polar bears, of course, are marine mammals that are also considered ice dependent because they feed off of the animals that live on the sea ice, primarily the seals. But here you see a polar bear scaling a cliff. So this is a bird cliff that belongs to those cute little auks that you saw in the photo before, which is another threat for them because polar bears are now starting to do these crazy acrobatics in order to feast on bird eggs and chicks, which is not a normal behavior for them, especially considering this is a 200 to 300 foot tall cliff. So this is extremely dangerous for polar bears to be doing. But these are the lengths that they're having to go to find enough food, to consume enough calories, to be able to try to sustain themselves. So this is, of course, bad for polar bears and also not good for the birds because a single polar bear can wipe out an entire bird colony in about 3 days. So this is obviously not ideal, not what we want to be seeing.
I'm looking at
But
that picture.
everything that
and
goes on in
I
the
see
Arctic
two
is
birds in front of the polar bear a little bit lower down.
yeah,
Is it going for the nest and
yeah,
the birds are defending the nest?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Yep, they do everything they can, but I mean, you're certainly not going to win against a polar bear. So, yeah, can try. But yeah, our Arctic ecosystems are extremely complex and all very much connected. Oh, next slide. I've got one more in this series, and then we're on to our next location. This image of an iceberg always just reminds me to pay attention to the fact that most of what we know is just that, quote, tip of the iceberg, so to speak, especially when it comes to ocean concepts. So much of what we know is just at the surface, and there's a lot more information, a lot deeper that we need to pay attention to
Right.
in order to better mitigate what's happening to our planet. So there's an Arctic story.
That's
And
a really good picture,
now
too.
we are moving.
Okay.
Thank you. I like it. It's very pretty. So now we are moving on to a warmer locale, but also very hard to get to. So this is Clipperton. Clipperton Atoll is the most remote atoll in the world. And atoll is, of course, just a ringed island. Most of them are formed because there used to be a volcano that then sank into the sea and left a ring of land around it. So that is generally how atolls come into being. Some of them are coral reefs as well. But when you see Clipperton from far away like this, you think, oh, well, that looks lovely, doesn't it? It's these light sands, this big rock, this one palm tree, very idyllic. Well, Clipperton has a pretty crazy history. So, Clipperton was actually discovered in 1711 by a couple French guys, and they named it Ile de la Passion, or Passion Island, because they discovered it on Good Friday. Fast forward 100 years, and nobody is calling it Ile de la Passion, they're calling it Clipperton. And that is because a pirate and privateer by the name of John Clipperton had started using Clipperton Island as his base of operations. Now, this place is in the middle of the Pacific. And so when I say remote, I'm talking like it takes 100 hours to get there from the coast of Mexico on boat. And that's today. That's by today's standards. So, I mean, it's nowhere near anything. So people don't live here. You know, this is not an island where anybody lives. This was just temporarily used as a base of operations. It was also used by the U.S. military for a bit during World War II. So there is still a whole munitions field on Clipperton Island, which is pretty weird to see, but that is what's still there. Also, because it's so remote, it has a lot of endemic species. Next.
Okay.
And this is a photo of one of their reefs from underwater. It's they don't have a ton of diversity, but there is a lot of biomass because, as you can imagine, something that's this remote, there isn't a ton of fish larvae that actually makes it out this far. So the species that can establish themselves stay there, and for the most part, though, there isn't a lot of influx of new genetics. So most of these are fairly common species around the Pacific, with the exception of a few that are endemic just to the region. There's a Clipperton damselfish, a Clipperton angel, and a few other Clipperton-specific species. You can see a couple of them in this image. Actually, that damsel that's got the kind of orange face and then that band along the tail that's sort of central. That's one of the Clipperton damsels. And yeah, they're pretty neat. It's a great place to be able to go, and almost no one gets to go, which is why I was really excited to, because it's a really tough place to get permits to go land on. So we did actually spend 5 days diving there and kind of exploring around on land to see what we could find. So next photo. There are also a lot of birds there. There's a huge bird population that has luckily rebounded. they hadn't done well for quite a while. So there are 3 different species of booby birds that live there. There's the masked booby, and the brown booby, and one other. And I think there's, if you want to go to the next slide, there's a
Sure.
picture of one.
Aw.
And there we go. There you go. There's a masked booby. They're so cool. It's a very pretty bird. But back in the 50s, their population was almost completely decimated. So after World War II, when American troops had been stationed, they brought food with them, and live food. So there were pigs. And if you know anything about pigs, is certainly that they eat just about anything they can get their little piggy mugs on. And bird eggs, especially ground nesting birds, are a really easy target for pigs. So within the time between about 1942 and 1950, almost the entire bird population is wiped out. It was down to about 500 birds. And then one ornithologist from the LA County Museum, decided to charter a boat to take him to Clipperton, and he got there, shot all the pigs, removed them from the island, and now we have this huge population of birds back on the island. So it's kind of a cool example of how like one person's decision can actually make a huge difference if it's for a positive thing. It's particularly good. But the birds are back, and there are now about 200,000 birds again.
I have a question for
the
you.
island.
So this picture you took,
Which is,
you were standing on the land.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this one of those places where
Yeah.
you're not allowed to go, or they're protected and humans have to stay away? I mean, what is? I know it's in the middle of nowhere, but if I wanted to go
Yeah.
there, would I get in trouble for going there? Is my question.
You would have to go with a group that had permits to go there. So it's really just a matter of finding folks that have permission to go. It's not that it's impossible to go or that people aren't allowed. It's a permit only kind of location. And since it's owned by the French government, they don't really give out a ton of permits. So if you can find French people or French Canadian people to go with, it actually helps your cause quite a bit. So yeah. That's what I was able to do anyway. So I was there with a group from the Explorers Club.
Nice. Okay. Cool.
But yeah, the birds, because they don't see many people, certainly don't seem to care about our
nice.
presence,
They're
which is
friendly.
kind of neat. Yeah. Yes, they are. But the thing that's really too bad about Clipperton, of course, is that, as you can see from these pictures, it is covered in plastic.
Yeah.
This is, of course, not because people have gone and put it there. This is just because of its specific location in the Pacific Ocean. It's between 2 or 3 different ocean gyres that push all of this trash onto land. And of the 8 miles around the Clipperton is, I can say that I stepped on plastic every single step of the way for the entire 8 miles. There was not a single step of that beach that didn't have plastic trash on it.
Ooh.
And this was just such an obvious duh moment for me. This is when I think it really sunk in that, like, we really need to change things. And we just don't require so many single-use items in our lives. And every country is guilty of this. I mean, every person is. We all do this. And some places, you can't really avoid it. But for those of us who are privileged enough to live in a country where we can use our money to make better decisions, I feel like we really do have an obligation to try to lead the way and do a little bit better, because there were plenty of things that I found on Clipperton that had made in the USA stickers or stamps on them. You know, this is not an other country problem. This is all of us. And, you know, by working together, we can collectively do a little bit better in this kind of scenario. So next picture.
Okay.
This is one of a bird looking at a water bottle. And I liked this one just because by the time we were done with all the surveys on the island, we were able to determine that it was actually more likely for a bird to run into a plastic bottle than it was for it to run into another bird, which is not a very good statistic to be finding out. And this whole bird facing off with the water bottle, I thought, was kind of indicative of the future that they're looking at if we don't try a little bit harder.
Yeah.
And it's not just the birds. Next slide. There are other critters that are using plastic in their lives. We've got crabs utilizing little bits of plastic and making their homes. And you see it everywhere on land, and you also see it everywhere underwater. Next slide. You can see when we were down there, we did a total of 9 dives in our 5 days that we were there.
Mm.
And in that time, we collected over 2 miles of long line. And this is all from industrial fishing vessels that just don't want to take the time to try to cut the line. If it's stuck to a reef, they just cut the whole thing off the ship and just dump it into the ocean.
Wow.
So, of course, this is not something that individually we can do anything about. But one way that we can influence these types of things is by being aware of the food that we eat and the seafood that we do choose to consume.
Yeah.
It's sometimes a pain to look at labels all the time and ask a ton of questions if you go to a restaurant, but if we're at least informed, we can make better choices about where our food comes from and try to ensure that we're not eating species that were probably collected in ways that are not sustainable and not healthy for our world's waters. Because we don't want to contribute to the industrial fishing and use of essentially ghost fishing nets. You get all of this ghost gear that gets cut off of these major vessels because they don't want to bother picking them up. And they continue traveling through our world's oceans, collecting marine life, killing things, entangling things, suffocating reefs. And, this is all feeling very far removed. But at the end of the day, when we look at all of our food choices, it all makes the difference. And shrimp trawlers are some of the most notoriously bad for that. And shrimp are a very common thing that we all eat. And it's one thing if it comes from somewhere that's local and that you live on a coast and you know where it's from. But it's quite another if we get a big bag of popcorn shrimp from Costco. You can pretty much guarantee that it's come from this kind of operation. And, it's just about being a little bit more aware of our food system and figuring out better ways to cut down on our impact and make different choices so that it doesn't look like that underwater. I've got one more slide from Clipperton after this and kind of shows you how pretty it can look topside and underwater, these parts of reef that just are still untouched and still pristine and are nice, clean, clear skies. And when you get to see these places, it certainly makes an impact and reminds you how critical it is that we do our part wherever we possibly can. So what's the list and what should we look for? There are a couple different aquariums actually that have put together some great lists of seafood that are good or not good to eat. Monterey Bay Aquarium has their own version. I think it's called Seafood. Oh, is it Seafood Watch? I think so. They have Seafood Watch, and then Shed Aquarium in Chicago has the Right Bite program, and they actually have downloadable little wallet cards. You can print them out if you want, or keep them on your phone. And it sort of breaks down seafood options into not good, sort of intermediate, and best options. So there's like a green list, a yellow list, and a red list.
Nice.
Things, for example, that you would see on a red list would be like bluefin tuna. I know everybody loves sushi. It is delicious, but bluefin tuna in general are the most endangered wildlife on the planet that we are legally allowed to eat. Eating bluefin tuna, depending on which populations they come from, is akin to eating a panda or a white rhino. I mean, like it's that ridiculous. Like we wouldn't do it on land. We would be horrified if somebody wanted to do that on land. But we think of ocean creatures differently. We call them seafood instead of sea life. So it's kind of a bit of a disconnect between how we look at
her talks and her paragraphs make you feel bad. No, seriously, that's a really good point. No, it's a great point. I've heard about bluefin tuna. I heard it's like a crazy moneymaker. Like if you catch one while you're fishing, you could, I don't know, sell it to like you said, a sushi restaurant and maybe get like $100,000 for one fish or something. I don't know how many people it feeds, but apparently it's worth a ton of money.
Well, I mean, one of the places that all of these bluefin tuna in particular wind up, and not to point a finger at a single country, but in this case, it is definitely more one than another. Japan consumes over 70% of the bluefin tuna in the world annually. And most of these huge tuna wind up in this Tsukiji fish market where they can be auctioned off for upwards of $1 million per fish. And it just, and it keeps going up every year. And it speaks to this strange kind of desire for rarity that humans tend to have, where it's like we'll pay more if there's less of it, and that's such a terrible way to look at it. Like scarcity should definitely not be the thing that is driving us. If anything, it should be precisely the opposite, which is sustainability. And I think a lot of it is just kind of changing how we look at scarcity as not necessarily being a thing that makes something worth more, but it should be worth more alive.
It should be more of a priority to protect.
Exactly.
Because there's less of it,
Exactly. There are much nicer ways to see these fishes than swimming in lemon slices and butter. So
Oh God.
especially when it comes to things like that. So, I mean, there are a few big examples that are just things that should be avoided. Another one that's not something you'd necessarily think of, but orange roughy,
Hmm.
which is, got a lot of different names over the years. Another one is Chilean sea bass, which
Hmm.
is actually Patagonian toothfish. So the reasons that these are not good options is because they're very deep water fish. They're very long lived. And they don't reach sexual maturity until they're over 30 years old. So
What?
it's
Wow.
extremely, yeah, yeah, which
Wow.
is kind of crazy
That's
considering
insane.
when you go remove a whole population of them.
Yeah.
It's like, you go in there with a purse seine and you use sonar to just nab the whole group up and then rake across the seabed as you're doing it. So it's, destroying habitat. It's pulling up a whole population all at once so that you're removing all this genetic diversity
Yeah.
and removing adults that probably even haven't had a chance to breed yet. So,
Yeah.
there are some species that just are not conducive to a global market.
Yeah.
They're better for pole and line caught stuff. And it's not to say you can never eat them. It's just we shouldn't be eating them at the scale that we are.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Hmm.
just kind of reevaluating our daily choices. And
Gotcha.
yeah, some of those aquarium programs are a great starter for getting an idea of what's sustainable and what's not.
Okay.
So yeah, I use them. I've used Right Bite from Chicago from Shed Aquarium for a really long time. I still have my little wallet card.
Oh, I think I know where you are
So,
now. That looks like my
oh,
Cuba.
it is. That is Cuba.
Hmm.
Woohoo! Yeah, I do love it there. So I've been very lucky to go to Cuba
Hmm.
no, 4 times. Ooh, so
Wow.
fun. So it's great. Topside, of course, it is like jumping into a time machine. It's like going back to the
That's what I've heard.
60s and seeing all these amazing cars and just like, of course, Cuba has a lot of faults, but it really is a beautiful country, and the people are lovely, and you get to see a different version of the world,
Yeah.
and it is as cool underwater as it is on top, and kind of because of its unique situation of its geopolitics and geography, it's been very isolated
Hmm.
from many parts of the world for quite a long time, and it shows in its marine protected areas. Let's go to the next slide.
And it's so
It
close to the
is one
United
of the
States too.
sharkiest places. I know, it's so easy to get to. I mean,
Yeah.
it really, really is. Like, if you ever have a chance to go to Cuba, it's fantastic. And the diving is amazing.
That's a
So,
great picture.
I'm sure a lot of us are aware, especially people who are part of this live stream, know that Florida's coral reefs, are having some trouble.
Yeah.
They're certainly not in good shape, and luckily there are a lot of restoration efforts, like Coral Restoration Foundation, trying to make a big difference here. Um, but the truth of the matter is, as our waters keep warming, there are going to be less and less solutions to fixing these coral reefs.
Yeah.
And it's important that there are repositories for Caribbean species that are relatively untouched. And Cuba, especially this one area called Gardens of the Queen, Jardines de la Reina, is one of those spots. It is very sharky, which for people who don't love swimming with sharks might not seem like a plus.
Hmm.
But sharks are major indicators of healthy ecosystems. When we have apex predators in abundance, it means that they have plenty of food, which consequently means that their food has plenty of space to live and plenty of things to eat as well. So they're an indicator of ecosystem health. Uh, this is a Caribbean reef shark. There are Caribbean reef sharks that you see on pretty much every dive when you go diving in Cuba, and that is a wonderful thing to be able to see. You see them closer to the surface, where you can interact with them as a scuba diver, just like this, where you see my friend Jessie with her
Hmm.
little GoPro
Yeah.
facing off with the shark. Or you see them in deeper reefs, like the next picture, if you want to go to the next one. This is a really beautiful site. It's one of my favorite sites in that area, called Black Coral 2. And they've got this big barrel sponge, and there are always bait fish and sharks and groupers and just so much life down there. And it's just fantastic to see that there are still places like this that exist, that protection really does work. And then for all of his faults, Castro was actually a major ocean conservationist because their family was friends with the Cousteaus,
Hmm.
who very regularly came diving in Cuba just because of its beautiful, beautiful waters.
Hmm.
And this rubbed off, and this whole area, Gardens of the Queen, was one of the first marine protected areas in the world. then in my opinion is still one of the best. It is absolutely gorgeous, and it is what coral reefs used to look like in the Caribbean back in the 50s and 60s. So it's a really good reference point for us. And I mention reference points because the idea of shifting baselines is really important in terms of how we talk about a changing world. For someone who's never been diving on a coral reef before, if you made your first dive today, you would think, wow, this is beautiful. But if you were somebody who made your same dive on that reef 30 years ago, you'd probably be horrified by what you're seeing today. But you wouldn't know unless there were a baseline for what it used to look like. So I say this just because it's so important for anyone who's capable of documenting, of taking images, of sharing stories, to do that, because it's a way to showcase what we still currently have so that in the future, we know what we could potentially lose. Because you don't want people in 30 years looking at a coral reef that's mostly gone and thinking that that's good, that that's normal, because it's not. We need to be making sure that we put a premium on documenting the places that we have left and looking at historical data to really get a full picture of what we had, what we have, and what we kind of have to look forward to into the future. Part of the reason that I also love going to Cuba is not just because it's so lovely, but it's a really good place to take pictures of people interacting with wildlife. Let's go to the next one. This is a picture of my friend Jessie, who is a world record-holding freediver. She's got like an 8-minute static breath hold. If you can imagine holding your breath for 8 minutes underwater, it's pretty insane.
Not even above water.
Right? It's complete crazy.
That is.
But when you can do stuff like that, you can also be part of really cool photo shoots like this one. And there are sharks all around her in the background. And she's in this really beautiful hand-painted silk dress made by a friend of ours in New York. And the idea of making a lot of these images is just to show that sharks are not what people assume them to be. The media loves to portray sharks as these mindless man-eaters that are going to go after us at any chance they get. And I promise you, if they went after us at any chance they got, none of us could ever go in the water. There are very, very, very few shark interactions compared to how many people are in the water with sharks. And it's important to keep that in mind, because all we ever hear about when we hear about sharks on the news are the bad interactions. We don't talk about how many times people interact with sharks and nothing at all happens whatsoever. And that represents the vast majority of human shark interactions. They're either positive or completely neutral. So it's nice to be able to make images like this to kind of showcase that. And Cuba is also home to one of the nicest populations of silky sharks. And I say nice because they are actually very sweet. They're kind of nosy. That's the next picture. Let's go to the next slide. Silky sharks are kind of a very nosy shark. They literally use their faces to kind of bump into things and figure out what you are, but not particularly nippy, which is good. You can do these beautiful dives in Cuba at sunset where the silkies kind of come up to see what people are up to. And as the sun is setting on this beautiful blue Caribbean water, you get to swim with 10, 20, sometimes 30 sharks all at once, which is a really amazing thing to do. And I can't imagine a better way to have a sunset. And I love taking images of sharks where they're not feeding and not looking vicious and ferocious, because those are of course always the ones that everybody wants to see. They want to see a great white shark with its mouth open ripping something to bits. And I mean, that's a cool, impressive picture, but that's not how they spend the majority of their lives. They're usually just swimming, surviving, and eating whenever there is a sick or injured animal in the water that they can opportunistically feed on. They're not hunting people down. These are all cases of mistaken identity when it comes to shark issues. And there are many, many things that are far more dangerous than sharks that we interact with on a regular basis. For example, vending machines. Vending machines have fallen down on people more frequently annually and killed them than sharks do.
That's interesting. Is that because we're dumb enough to shake the machine and knock it on top of ourselves?
And that's exactly what it is, Mark. Yeah, it's precisely it. But we don't really think of vending machines being vicious predators. Nor do we
should. Okay, that's the next article in Coral.
Beware the vending machine. But yeah, I mean, it's everything. Coconuts falling off of trees kill like 20 people a year. That's way more than sharks. Only like 4 to 6 people are killed every year in shark attacks, and here we've got 20 to 24 people being killed by falling coconuts.
That's hilarious. Wow.
Cows are like way more dangerous.
It's the cow tipping. That's a project.
It's the
you
cow
gotta
tipping.
do that. So,
It's
yeah,
not messing around.
Yeah, it is. That's hilarious.
Well, and then like dogs, snakes. I mean, these are all things that we don't. And mosquitoes, they're actually the most dangerous. I think we're up to 725,000 human deaths are caused by mosquito-borne illnesses every year.
Wow.
But we don't think of them in those terms. Like if you
Yeah.
did a screen grab of some article about mosquitoes being the biggest killers, you'd be like, oh really, that's nonsense, it's obviously sharks. Yeah, well, not correct.
Wow.
So it's just a perspective thing,
Yep.
and it's really easy to vilify something that looks like a shark and that is a predator and that is potentially dangerous.
Yeah.
But they are very critical parts of our ecosystems and are, in my opinion, absolutely beautiful. So yeah, it's very nice. All right, I've got a few more slides for you, and then we'll move on. So this is another one of the things that you can see in Cuba that you can still see in Florida, but it's a bit of a worrisome situation at the moment. So this is a Goliath grouper. The Goliath grouper fishery in Florida is a sport fishery only. It's a very big animal. Like they can be up to 400 pounds.
Right.
So when you take in an animal that's this size, the flesh really isn't very good. Like it doesn't have very tasty meat, so it's purely recreational, just to bring in a huge fish. And this type of fishing decimated the Goliath grouper population during the 80s and 90s. There was a moratorium for a while, which has been great for the species, and they are being replenished and they are coming back. But of course, as soon as there were enough of them, there was a big petition out to reopen the Goliath grouper fishery.
Yeah.
And it's like, can we just leave them alone for a little while? Can we just give them some time to rebound? I mean, this is the thing about the ocean and just animal populations in general. If we just give them some space, they come back. We just really need to take the pressure off of everything and just kind of take a step back and let the ocean have a moment.
Do you happen to
where
know
we're not
why
constantly hammering away?
Do you happen to know why they die? Is it because they're just so exhausted from fighting the fishermen that they just sink to the bottom? Is that
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. And it's such a big fish, like they almost crush themselves under their own weight. So by the time they're actually hauled out, weighed, all of this, they don't usually survive. And in some cases, that's not really even a priority. Like it's, you want to get the biggest one because then you can say you got the biggest one and get your picture with it. I mean, there are still shark fishing tournaments all over the East Coast. Rhode Island is one of the biggest proponents of that, and they have a huge shark fishing tournament, and there is absolutely no purpose in it. I mean, it is for fun, and most of the time this meat doesn't even get used. I mean, a lot of shark meat is not particularly tasty. Some is not, but it's also really high in mercury. Whenever you're eating large oceanic predators, mercury bioaccumulates up the food chain. So when you're looking at a 300 or 400 pound shark, it's consumed a lot of mercury in its lifetime. It's just not safe to eat. So what are you going to do with it? You just went and killed this big, beautiful blue shark that's a pregnant female because it was the biggest one you could find. And why? Just because you wanted to? Like there are just some things that to me don't make a whole lot of sense. Like a food fishery is one thing. Sport fishing, especially for endangered species and apex predators in particular, I don't think there's much excuse for it, honestly. I'm sure other people may not agree, but I don't really see there to be much of a purpose for it in an educated population. So anyway, Goliath groupers kind of fall on the edge of this one to me as well. And it's just a species that needs a break. So whenever there are petitions that come up, it's like, open the fishery. I'm like, no, we're going to comment against this. They need more time. So Goliath groupers are, of course, a protected animal in Cuba, which is great. And you can see them regularly on the reef. And they're actually very stealthy. You don't even notice that they come up next to you.
Really?
And all of a sudden you feel this huge presence and you're like, oh my God, there's a giant fish next to me.
Wow.
But they're very cool. Like they're really neat to see in the water. And what else have we got? Oh yeah, I've got a couple more. All right, one more, we'll go to the next one.
It's pretty.
It's so pretty, and it just shows you how plentiful Caribbean reefs can and should be. I mean, you've got a shark in the background, you've got grunts, groupers, goatfish, corals everywhere. I mean, it's a healthy reef system, and
Yeah.
it's subject to all of the same climate change issues that all of the reefs in Florida are too. It's not like it's immune to that and that there's never bleaching. There is. It's just that there are so many other fewer stressors in the area
Hmm.
that the reefs can rebound and they've got more of a break. So this is just all kind of to say that it's not hopeless.
Yeah.
We can help our Florida coral reefs, but we really need to take pressure off in a lot of different ways. I've got one more picture from Cuba in the next slide. And I mean, how nice would it be to have these reefs back
Yeah.
with these huge stands of, elkhorn and staghorn acropora, tons of fish under them. I mean, this is only in 10 or 15 feet of water in Cuba. So it's certainly not that the water isn't warm. It's quite warm. But, other pressures are not there. So the fish have a chance to come back. The corals can survive. And it's a lovely option. And I've got, I guess, one more slide and I've got one more Cuba picture just because I love showing this one. This is another cool thing that you can do in Cuba, which is swim with crocodiles. So this is an American crocodile, not a Cuban. And they're so used to people there that they really do not care about your presence. And it's just a really cool opportunity to photograph another predator that, seems like one of those animals that you wouldn't have a lot of empathy for. But when you actually get to hang out in the water and just sit at the surface, wait for them to come up to you, realize that there is mutual respect that can be had between predators, because we are technically the biggest predator in the world. There's a lot to be said for that, and that there's space. There's space for all of us to exist, and we can all do a better job. And I guess I will end on the crocodile, and we'll go from there. And if there are any random questions,
That was fantastic. No, we're out of time.
Okay,
It's
good.
4
Bye.
o'clock.
Goodbye. No.
So the next.
Oh,
we
it
gotta line
is.
up the
Yeah,
next
look at
one.
that.
It's
On the
been-
dot.
I know you did it. Even with me being delayed at the beginning, that's the worst part. See, I'm burning minutes, because I have to get ready for the next one. But
You're all
this
good.
was so good. I'm so glad you were on Mark. I knew you'd be a fantastic speaker. The comments
Thanks,
were
Mark.
great. They love you. They're just like, wow,
Yay.
best talk ever. Stuff like that. And I really appreciate it because I knew you had these stellar pictures. I can't believe you get all this with an iPhone. I'm so impressed.
You'd actually be surprised how well you can do with an iPhone. There are a couple companies that make really good housings for them. I've got a couple friends that actually shoot on iPhone, and they're shockingly good. So
Yeah, no, I use iPhone all the time. I was teasing you because I know you go down. I will tell one funny story. I was with Alex on a dive. Don't remember where we were. I guess Florida probably.
Florida.
And
Yeah.
we went. She brought out this camera. It was amazing. The handles, the lights, the big bubble over the housing. I mean, it just looked like it was worth about $50,000. It looked really expensive. And she was checking everything, making sure it was airtight. Make sure it's safe. And then we all went out to the spot to dive in. We all went in. She went her way. I went with my buddy a different direction, I guess. Because then I saw her at the end. I was like, "So how did your pictures come out?" And she said, "When I got down there, I had a dead battery. I just had to lay the camera down and go enjoy the dive and then retrieve it." And I was like, all that prep, all that work, and it was we all have done things like that. And I always remember
Absolutely. That's really funny, Mark.
Yeah.
I've had a couple like that. One time I left the lens cap on.
that.
That was
Oh, no, and you're in the bubble. You can't just pop it off because you can't release
No.
the air. Yeah. Oh, man.
Nope,
Wow.
that's it. You're done.
Well, Alex, that was fantastic, and I'm just going to go on the record here in front of the entire world and say I'm looking forward very much to working with you with Coral Magazine. I'm really excited. So
Me too.
thank you
Yay.
so much for being a participant, and I'm going to let you go.
Thanks for having
Guys,
me.
we're going to end this video. That's going to be the end of the stream. We're going to start a new one with Travis Knorr from Masna. So check Mila's Reef on YouTube here in a couple of minutes as we get organized yet again in this world of no electricity in my home. Thank you so much, Alex.
Don't melt.
I'm trying not to. Oh, by the way, I will say that I did have to send Dwayne for ice for the tanks because they're getting hot.
Oh my God.
And so he's on it. It's just one more thing. So we are just still in crisis mode over here. All right, let's just end on that note because that's so positive. Thank you. Your presentation was fantastic. Don't put plastic
Thanks,
in the
Mark.
ocean. All right,
Don't
bye.
do it.
Don't. All right,
Okay, bye.